What is up, guys? You already know what it is. Thank you for tuning in today. We got a special one for you guys. Today we're going to be going through and trying to categorize all of the different eras of behavior design philosophy when making killers. Now, I've been playing this game since 2016, and I've seen the overall general design philosophy of killers change throughout the years, most of them influenced by certain factors. What is this lady doing in front of me? Just running, giving me a free hit. But anyways, the three criteria that we're going to be using to categorize and assess each era in behavior's history for making killers. The first is going to be what caused this change. So what was the cause of behavior needing to make this shift in design philosophy for killers? The second is going to be how did survivors adapt to this change in design philosophy, and how did that affect the subsequent era? Lastly, we're going to be assessing the fun and the balance of each era. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that this is not going to be a perfect science. There is going to be overlap in eras, right? It's kind of like you in grade school, when you build on each grade that you learn something new, you take it to the next grade. It's not that you stop learning that after a certain grade, right? It's a building on for each era. We're going to be outlining some prevalent killers for each era that really define that era, so that we have some kind of an anchor point to base our analysis off. As always, if you guys do enjoy these videos, please consider liking and subscribing, as it really does help out my channel. I know you guys have been liking my discussion videos lately, so here you go. Here's another one. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. The first era that we'll be talking about is the Slowdown Era. Now, this ran from around 2017 to 2018, with the most notable killers being the Doctor, Freddy, and the Pig, all with built-in slowdown mechanics upon release. Now, what caused behavior to shift towards this direction when designing killers during that time? Well, as survivors learned how to play the game, and keep in mind that the game was very new at this point, and a lot of survivors didn't really know how to play efficiently. They would usually just hide in corners, heal, they would see a killer and just look at them from a distance and get scared. You know, survivors weren't efficient at that time. However, at higher MMR, you know, it was a ranking system back then, but for simplicity's use, I'll just say higher MMR. Higher MMR players would be very efficient at the game, and this combined with all of the busted add-ons and items that you could bring, most notably the old brand new part, not even the instant brand new part, just the old brand new part, which would let you do a gen in like 15 seconds or something. It was extremely busted, and when you got a Swift or even a few competent players in a team, the game would go by very fast, regardless of how good of a killer you were. Now, the examples that we mentioned, Dr., Freddy, and the Pig, they all had some kind of slowdown built into their base kit. The Doctor would get you mad, he would just constantly shock you, and your madness would tear up, and then you would need to basically snap yourself out of madness. With Freddy, he had some insane slowdown. He would basically pull you into the dream world, and then I believe your action speeds would become slower, combined with all the other slowdown killer perks that were being released at the time. And then the Pig, of course, had her traps. Now, the Pig obviously did have a bit of an anti-loot power, but as mentioned before, a lot of overlap will occur and things will evolve throughout the years. It's like when you're in math class, you know, what you learn in what you learn in grade 1, right? You're gonna still apply in grade 6. You're not going to be learning the exact same things, but you're going to be building on every year. Now, how did survivors adapt to this playstyle and design shift, and what was done as a result of that? So when survivors started to realize that, okay, the behavior is pumping out killers that are slowing down the game, okay, one teammate, just take them, go loop them, or not even loop them at the time, just run them around something, right? And they had weak anti-loop powers back then. Run them around something, and then the other survivors would still have time to do generators, which is the main objective, of course, and that would basically be it, right? So that would be the counter to the whole Slowdown era, is one survivor just takes them. Killers had relatively shitty anti-loop, except of course the nurse and Billy and whatnot. And then the other survivors would essentially just do gens as normal. Now, in terms of fun and balance of this era, It's very hard to say because back then this game was completely different. I lived it and I honestly did not think about, oh my goodness, this game is so broken. The game is taking like 10 minutes, right? It was just how you played the game. Nowadays, we're all very focused on the chase and efficiency and getting kills and getting escapes. Back then, it was it was honestly scary. It was like the vibe of playing the game, and just slowing down the game meant you had to endure that anxiety and tension more. So I would say personally, it was fun back then. I didn't think it was absolutely busted. You know, going against a Freddy with what are those called, swing chains, was annoying at points, but you know, it was doable. And in terms of balance for back then, survivors had a million different things that they could speed up the game with, and same on the killer side. And this whole slowdown philosophy just balanced it out. So you know, the game was busted in extreme ways on either ends, but in a funny and ironic way, it actually balanced itself out. Now, moving on to the era of anti-loop, and this is a very discrete turning point in behavior's design philosophy for killers. I remember this clear as day. It was actually when they released the Clown. Now, the Clown was the first killer that had an official anti-loop oriented power, where behavior went in designing the killer to specifically help end chases around loops when chasing survivors. Now, this era ran from around 2018 to 2019, of course, beginning with the Clown. Another few notable killers in this era would be Spirit, as well as Plague with her projectile vomit. Now, at the same time, on the survivor side, behavior was also releasing perks that would help survivors loop more efficiently due to this shift in design philosophy for making killers with anti-loop. A notable perk would be Windows of Opportunity. Now, given that it's not as powerful as it is nowadays, it was still very beneficial if you were to use it and be a main chaser in the game. Now, as mentioned in our previous segment, when survivors started to realize that, okay, we could just take this killer and start looping them, because survivors started to get better at looping. They started to know how to play certain tiles like jungle gyms. Survivors know how to play shack better. There was those bus tiles with the double windows at the time. Survivors started to learn how to basically play around loops. And essentially, behavior said, okay, if the survivors are now learning how to use these resources in the map more efficiently, we now have to give killers something that counteracts this efficiency in loops, so that they don't just get practically infinitely looped around something like a bus or a shack tile or a jungle gym, for instance, right? And there were a lot of connected jungle gyms and tiles back then as well. That's a whole different topic, map design, but there were a lot of busted loops back then and loop setups. So as survivors realized how to start looping killers, and that was the direction that survivors were moving in, the killer design philosophy also moved into having some sort of anti-loop. And there was also built-in slowdown, you know, with the Plague. She had her fountains, and as mentioned previously, they always build on the previous era. They never kind of go away from it. It's always a building step towards the next era. So essentially what caused the shift was survivors getting better at looping killers, and the necessity for killers to have something that would help in chase. Now let's talk about a very hot topic, still a hot topic to this day. How did survivors start to adapt to this design philosophy? And it's kind of a gray area and a catch-22 for behavior, because it's like, what can they really do, right? So how did survivors adapt to this philosophy of killers getting an anti-loop power? You guessed it, holding W. It was the dawn of holding W. Now, we'll talk about this in a bit later of an era when it became very prevalent, but at this time, survivors were realizing, okay, if this killer has an anti-loop power, and he's going to be thinking in his mind, okay, the survivor is going to stay here and I'm going to play this tile with my power, why not just run away from the tile? And at that time, of course, survivors weren't as good as they are now, but very good survivors would realize when a killer is trying to play around a loop and stay at a loop, and then they would essentially just trick them in staying there and then leave another loop. Hence the name holding W away. Now, for the degree of fun and balance for this era, I loved it. This is the OG spark of Dead by Daylight's core and what everyone likes, both survivors and killers. It's all about the chase. It's all about using your power efficiently as a killer to catch the other survivor. And on the survivor side, it's about using your wit to be able to counteract any power that's being used around a loop. For example, in a Spirit, the Dawn of the Mind game, the 50-50 at a red pallets. For Clown, of course, he only had his pink bottles back then, but you would want to kind of dodge the pallets. You would dodge the pallets. Yeah, imagine they made a killer that you could just dodge pallets at. That's just throws pallets at you. That's crazy. Dodge Clown's bottles and kind of predict what distance you need to be able to successfully vault a window without getting hit, so on and so forth. So it was the spark of a lot of it was like kind of that sparking phase for Dead by Daylight to really become a game where you could express your skill, whereas before it was more so hiding and kind of strategically playing, and time efficiency. Now it was like, okay, I could really express my skill in this game, either as a survivor, as killer, or a killer, through your mechanics, through your mouse and keyboard or controller if you're playing on it. It was a beautiful time in the game that sparked a very necessary movement for this game. And I think, honestly, if this era never had happened, Dead by Daylight wouldn't be the game that it is today. If you guys are enjoying this, please consider liking and subscribing, and or dropping a comment in the section below, as it really does help my channel grow, and I would truly appreciate it. Next up, we have the map control phase, which ran from about 2019 to 2021. Now, this was the era where Behavior was really getting a relatively good grasp on how to make a well-balanced killer. I could already see the rage comments in the section. Well-balanced, Inferno. Did you just say well-balanced? This was the era when Behavior started to make killers like the Demogorgon, Oni, Nemesis, and ending this era would be Pinhead. Now, the gist of this era would be that the killers would have a map control ability built into their base kit, such that they could go to different areas of the map at any given time, or using one of their powers, such as the Demogorgon's portals. But essentially they could go from one area of the map to the other. And this was around the time when maps were still pretty large. They didn't do that whole rework of the different realms. Maps were pretty busted at that time still. And it was very beneficial for killers to have this kind of mobility power, map control mobility power, to go and get to another generator that was on the other side. Now, what caused the shift in this design philosophy? So, as mentioned before, killers started to have a anti-loop power in their base kits. Now, usually what would happen, and at this time survivors were getting very good, this was, I think, one of the peak eras in Dead by Daylight between 2019 and 2021. What survivors would begin doing now is one survivor would go and take the killer somewhere else, completely in a dead zone where gens had either been completed, or in a map where there was a low volume of generators, a low density of generators, so that it would be optimal to run the killer around there. And what they would do is they would run them for 30 seconds, 1 minute, 1 minute 30, and then basically the killer, once they did down the survivor eventually due to bloodlust or just getting them with their power, they would basically have to manually walk to the basically other side of the map, especially if the map was very big like Mother's Dwelling. It would waste a lot of time. It was pretty much the equivalent of chasing a whole another survivor and getting nothing, just simply walking to the other end of the map. So with this change, Behavior gave killers a ability to traverse the map in a faster way, whilst also giving survivors the ability to counter this map mobility, specifically with Demo being able to destroy his portals. With Oni, you were kind of shit out of luck, but hey, everyone loves Oni. I love him too. With Nemesis, this was kind of getting later in the era. They used his two zombies to have that passive kind of map control, which I really liked. Very RNG based, but still very good idea, very good philosophy. And now, unfortunately, quite annoying killer to go against, especially if you're in solo queue, which would be Pinhead. He also had this passive kind of map control with his pins, what's it called? With his lament configuration, hell spawn thing. I don't even know what it's called, man. I'm just ashamed of myself. I'm such a Pinhead fan too. Basically this passive kind of map control, and what it would do, it was also a built-in slowdown. He had anti-loop, and he had this map control as well. Now, at this point in time, even if you were in solo queue, you were relatively accustomed to the game if you had been playing even for a year or two or even less, right? You would know that, okay, certain killers such as Pinhead, you had to have this side objective. So it shifted from only having the generators as an objective to usually a side objective, whether that meant destroying a portal for a Demogorgon, or one person going and solving the Lament Cube as Pinhead. it was kind of a shift in objective, so that built in slowdown as well, but there was counterplay on the survivor's part. Now, this was a very bringing it into the balanced and fun aspect of this whole era of Dead by Daylight's design for killers. It was quite fun because, as mentioned before, it gave survivors kind of a side objective in many cases, like Pinhead and Demogorgon, to counter their map mobility, but at the same time, it was very beneficial if a good Demogorgon knew how to place their portals. They can now rely on that to get to the other side of the map rather than having to walk there. All in all, I think this was a very healthy phase in Dead by Daylight's design philosophy moving forward, as it reduced the reliance on simply just walking to the other side of the map, in combination with Dead by Daylight fixing a lot of their maps to make them a bit smaller, make the looping setups a little less busted. It was a very, I'd say, healthy phase for the overall game. In terms of fun, everyone wants the game to be more fun. You never want one side feeling like shit, because then that player will just uninstall, and then there we go, we lost a player. And let's hope to God that this game never dies. Let's all continue to play. I love this game too much, man. But anyways, yeah, I think it was a very good era of Dead by Daylight, very healthy era to give killers this kind of map mobility, and they did a really good job during that time. If you guys are enjoying this, please consider liking and subscribing, and or dropping a comment in the section below, as it really does help my channel grow, and I would truly appreciate it. Now, moving on to a very quote-unquote fun era to discuss, a very pain point for a lot of survivors, and especially me as a killer. I really did not like this whole era of them making killers like this, and I think a lot of people share my same opinion. But this would be the area control era, running from around 2021 and ending in 2023. Again, when I say ending, I mean the actual start and end of this era. Of course, it carries on into future years. But the most notable killer for this would be the Knight and the Skull Merchant, as well as starting with the Artist and then ending with the Singularity. Now, what did this era entail? It was basically the design philosophy of behavior making killers that would just lock down a certain era. Now, I know what you're going to be thinking. Obviously, it's going to be the spark of the whole 3-gen era. Now, I'm not, and just a little side note here, maybe it's because they hired a bunch of people during time, and it was a lot of shift in management and design philosophy, but I don't know what they were thinking with this whole era, especially with the release of the original Knight and the Skull Merchant. It was essentially survivors run to a loop, just shit out something like a guard or a drone, and basically the survivor had to run away from that loop. And this was exacerbated with the whole introduction of the Artist and the very high prevalence of just holding W away from a loop. So it was like a double whammy for both survivors and killers. Now, for what caused this shift, I really don't know why they started making killers like this all of a sudden. I'm pretty sure it had to do with basically survivors just getting super good at looping, in combination with Swifts and just really good solo queue survivors being able to loop killers really well. So I guess they thought, okay, let's just make a power that just completely shuts down loop with minimal skill. Say, for example, the Artist, she would just place 3 crows at a loop, you would hold W. Skull Merchant, pop out a drone, you would have to leave except unless you want to get exposed. Knight, plop down a guard at a pallet, he breaks it, pop down a guard. You know, it was very low brain, low IQ Coomer shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was not good design philosophy at all. And I think this was a very hot topic during that time. And a lot of people actually fell off from playing Dead by Daylight, unfortunately, because, you know, when they started playing for a year, they're like, oh, this game's so great. And then they start getting like these 3 killers in a row. Not saying that I love playing Artist, you know, in a certain play style. She's very fun to play, but when you're playing in that kind of zoning play style, this could also be called the zoning era. When you're playing in that kind of play style, it's really not that fun for either side, and it does not allow for any skill expression whatsoever. Now, it's pretty straightforward as to how survivors adapted, and it's quite unfortunate, although pretty effective. And given that this was the type of strategy that killers would be using, you know, I don't blame survivors for doing this, but it was full on hold W. Like, mash your W button into the ground, go to a loop, pretend like you're about to play it, and then just run away from that loop. It was very boring. It involved no skill expression. If you were someone like the Artist or Knight, you wouldn't even be able to catch up to them because you had no kind of mobility. However, if you were the Singularity, which was kind of the end of this era, and thankfully they actually ended this era with quite a nice killer. He's gone through a lot of changes, but regardless, he's in a very good spot right now, which would be the Singularity. You know, he could have that map control, but he also has that skill expression through his chase mechanic. You have to know where to aim your biopods. You have to know where to place them. You have to be quick at shooting them. You know, there's a lot of skill expression in there. Even though he could shut down loops easily, it was not a no brain, low IQ kind of killer power. And of course, you're going to guess the degree of fun and balance in this era was absolutely gutted. There was no balance to this. There was no degree of fun. You know, the killer, you know, on the killer side, as mentioned, you would just plop down something and then basically void that entire loop, and the survivor would have to run away. In terms of balance, there was nothing really to talk about because you would just run away, and then the killer would just have to go and chase you like normal, and you're basically just taking a stroll in the park. That was the entire gameplay. Just chasing a survivor from loop to loop, getting bloodlust, or using her power if the survivor stayed in that loop, and it was very not good. Next up, we have the all-in-one era. Now, this was a relatively short-lived era and still continues to this day, but the all-in-one era included killers such as the Xenomorph, Vecna, and Dracula, and this era ran from about 2023 to 2024. Now, this era basically saw killers that were a jack of all trades, for a lack of a better word. They basically had mobility, they had some kind of slowdown, and they had their anti-loop. Xenomorph was a good example of this. He could use his tunnels to traverse the map, and they're fixed in locations. He also had very good anti-loop. Unfortunately, they're kind of gutting him nowadays, but that's another topic. And he also had his built-in slowdown because the survivors would need to go and get the fire turrets and go and place them, which would waste around 10 to 15 seconds depending on where you place them. So there was nothing necessarily that caused this shift. It was more so just an accumulation of all the previous design philosophies coming into new killers now, and given these killers that came out were very powerful, such as Dracula, one of the most powerful killers in the game. He was essentially just a jack of all trades. He had that mobility, he had that anti-loop with his fire flames, and he doesn't even need slowdown. He's so powerful, but the idea of having everything in your base kit to use to your advantage was the design philosophy of this era. Now, it's a very unique way that survivors adapted to this, and this was quite recent, so we're still learning, but I think that this actually made survivors much better in terms of the overall macro gameplay, because now survivors, new or old, saw that behavior was basically releasing each killer with a full base kit set of mobility, anti-loop, and slowdown. So it allowed survivors, it actually forced survivors to learn how to play the game better, especially if you were solo queue. Now you couldn't just be like, okay, this guy's going to deal with the chase, or I'm just going to focus on generators and kind of destroy whatever portals he has to have map mobility. No, you had to learn the entire game and learn the macro gameplay, and I think it was a very good and needed era that we went through very recently, as it made survivors much better, which is I always advocate for that. I always want each side to get more better, because then they continue to play the game and it's just more fun, and it's just a more skill expressive game, which is what I'm always vouching for. Now, this brings us to our final era that we're currently in, and of course it's still a work in progress, because this era only started, I'd say, this year with the release of Tokyo Ghoul's Ken Kanaki, as well as the Skull Merchant rework and the very recent Legion rework as well. So what does this era entail? It's basically a injure and chase kind of era. Now, there are two sides to this era, a pro and a con, and we're going to discuss the pros first. So the pros would be the philosophy of a killer like Ken Kanaki being able to use their power to get a relatively easy injure on the survivor, right? In some cases, like Kanaki, a bit too easy, but using your power to get that initial injure, and then basically just playing as an M1 killer around basic loops. I think a lot of survivors over the years have gotten accustomed to basically playing against a anti-loop power, holding W. You know, there's a lot of layers to this cake, and I think people have forgotten that the cake sits on a base plate, and that base plate is the aspect of basic tiles like jungle gyms, shack, buses, and whatnot, right? And over the years, all of these types of looping structures and resources have been nerfed in a sense, right? And become more balanced, I should say, for both sides. And I think it is really important for both the survivor and killer to kind of relearn how to play that base core game mechanic that was introduced all so long ago. Now, I do see on the other side how this could cause a lot of frustration, and I personally share this as well. I don't want a killer that could just injure me and then we play as a basic M1 killer. There's not really any fun in that. So there's going to have to be that kind of golden area, that kind of golden middle, that behavior, if they are to pursue this kind of design philosophy with killers going forward. They're going to have to find that golden place where it's not like, okay, a free injure and then they are just a basic M1 killer at a tile, because no one likes that. That's quite boring. They're going to have to find that golden spot where there's skill expression on both sides. And Kanaki is a good example of that. I think his injure is a bit too free, but his ability to play around a tile with his power, and not just a straight up anti-loop power where you actually have to use your power to kind of cut them off around pallets and windows if you're playing in the fun style and not just the boring break a pallet and catch up in a dead zone. But if you are playing in the style where you're swinging around like Spider-Man and using your power to cut off survivors, I think that is a bang on, nail on kind of power. But I think the injure is too free for Kanaki. But if they do pursue this, I do have high hopes, and it's really just a test of time from now on, and we'll see how it goes. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. If you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing and liking, as it really does help my channel out. I do thank all 347 of you for subscribing to my channel. Honestly means a lot for something that I love to do. And yeah, with that being said, have a nice day, have a nice weekend, and take care.